What if your thoughts weren't entirely yours? Deep beneath the sands of the Atacama Desert, a group of engineers uncovered a signal not sent, not received, but waiting. A heartbeat buried under Earth's crust. A whisper designed not for ears, but for the mind. As time and space distorted, they began to change, not from fear, but from resonance. One by one, they heard it, felt it, became it. But the question is, if something ancient is trying to awaken humanity, would we evolve? Or vanish? Tonight, we explore the frequency nest, a story of alien consciousness, forgotten origins, and the terrifying beauty of surrendering to something greater than the self. Stay with us. The desert was too quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't just press against your ears, it wrapped around your chest, settled behind your eyes, and watched. The Atacama, one of Earth's driest places, had always been lifeless. But this place, this small forgotten stretch beyond the known research grid, was different. Not just quiet, absent. As if reality here took a breath in, and never exhaled. A convoy of 5 engineers, led by Dr. Marta Alejandra Núñez, rolled across the parched earth. Their mission was specific and confidential: to investigate a newly registered dead zone in the frequency band spectrum, one where no electromagnetic signal could enter, and none could escape. The locals called it El Nido del Silencio, the nest of silence. But no one lived close enough to care. Birds avoided it. Storms never touched it. It was a hole in the map, and they were the first team to step inside it with modern instruments. Their equipment was cutting edge: signal boosters, resonance scanners, atmospheric sniffers, and a newly developed frequency displacer that could punch waves through dense magnetic fields. Marta, cold and scientific, believed it was a geological phenomenon, maybe some natural crystalline anomaly. But even as she stepped onto the zone's edge, she felt something twist inside her chest. Not pain. Not fear. Stillness. Too perfect to be natural. They set up the signal tower before sunset. It was tall, humming quietly, sending low-frequency pulses every 6 seconds. The receivers remained silent. At first, they assumed interference. Camilo, the youngest engineer, adjusted the dials. Still nothing. Marta increased power. No change. It was like throwing pebbles into a black lake and hearing no splash. The signals vanished. No echo. No reflection. Just gone. Even their handheld radios began to distort the closer they got to the center of the zone. Voices turned into static. Then to clicking. Then to nothing at all. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The sky above the zone looked darker than the rest, almost like it absorbed starlight. Their thermal cameras began malfunctioning, showing strange flickers of heat not where the humans were, but underground. Like veins pulsing beneath the surface. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but the feeling grew heavier: something was down there. Not alive in a biological way, but not dead either. Camilo volunteered to monitor the tower overnight. At 2:43 a.m., he left the lab van to check the output. The air felt like glass, fragile, wrong, almost synthetic. He reached the tower, and as he placed his hand on its cold metal base, a soft vibration ran through his bones. And then he heard it. Not a sound in the air. A whisper in his mind. It was low, slow, and didn't use words, more like a shadow of thought, brushing against his consciousness. He pulled away, but it followed. Not louder, just deeper. Like it was not trying to speak to him, but to remember through him. His heartbeat jumped. The whisper grew into a rhythm, 3 soft pulses, a pause, 3 more. He ran back to the van, face pale, hands shaking. He told Marta, but she dismissed it as auditory hallucination caused by stress. Yet when she looked at the signal logs, her face changed. A new data entry had appeared, 3 low bursts, spaced exactly apart, like a signature. No one had sent it. It hadn't come from outside. It had come from beneath. They played it on a loop. 3, pause. 3. But when Camillo listened again, he heard more than rhythm. He heard an intention behind the pulse. A question. Like something, or someone, was testing if anyone could still feel. Not here. Feel. Outside, the wind died completely. The air itself became unnaturally still. Marta stepped out again, and as she walked further into the zone, her watch stopped ticking. The second hand froze. Her hair rose slightly from her scalp, like static, but no charge registered on any device. Then she felt it, the same pulse, not in her ears, but in her spine. Each beat like a soft knock on the door of her mind, asking to be let in. She did not speak of it. Not yet. The team didn't sleep that night. The silence around them was no longer passive, it had become aware. And it had noticed them. The next morning began with a silence that was not natural. It wasn't the usual hush of the desert, where wind and sun conspire to keep the world still. This was a forced silence, like something was pressing down on the land with invisible weight, suppressing not just sound, but even thought. The birds that had nested in the ridge the day before were gone. No feathers. No sign of departure. Just absence. Camillo sat in the van, eyes wide, watching the signal graph repeat the same strange pulse. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. It had been going like that since 2:43 a.m. No drift. No glitch. Not artificial. Not human. But not random either. Dr. Martin Nunez began recalibrating the receivers. She redirected their ultra-low frequency dish to scan beneath the surface. If the signal came from under the desert, she wanted to know what lay below. The data returned was not right. It didn't show rock layers or underground water. It showed motion, not seismic activity, but a rhythmic pulsation, deep and slow, like a sleeping heart buried miles beneath. The amplitude was subtle, but perfectly timed with the signal. The Earth wasn't just still. It was responding. By noon, they brought out a newly classified prototype, the Neural Flux Interceptor, designed to read shifts in human bioelectric fields under unknown M interference. It wasn't supposed to be used outside the lab, but Martin needed to understand why both she and Camillo had experienced non-auditory whispers. When she tested it on herself, the display blinked once, then shut down. Fried. Camillo's test triggered an overload spike, his alpha waves distorted beyond recognition, like his brain was syncing with an external pattern. Alejandra, their soft-spoken linguist consultant, had been mostly silent until now. She reviewed the waveform on the screen and noticed something strange. The spacing between the signal pulses wasn't just rhythmic, it followed a pattern known in ancient rituals, especially Mayan and Sumerian incantations. "This isn't a message," she said slowly. "It's a call to harmonize. Like a song that only the nervous system can hear." The group fell into a tense quiet. That night, they ran another scan. The signal had grown stronger without their equipment broadcasting anything. As if something beneath had learned how to speak louder. The zone's edges began expanding. They noticed their signal jammers, set to contain the area, were starting to malfunction. Static hissed louder. Frequencies scrambled. Batteries drained 30% faster than normal. The lights in their portable lab flickered, though the generators ran fine. Something was feeding, not on power, but on presence. At 2:19 a.m., Marta awoke to the sensation of being watched, but not from outside the tent. From within her own mind. She sat up and felt her skin grow cold, as if her body no longer trusted the air. She heard the pulse again, but this time, it morphed. 3 pulses. Pause. Then a 4th pulse. A new element. A new note in the pattern. She grabbed her recorder and began documenting her thoughts, but the mic only picked up a faint hum like thousands of overlapping voices whispering beneath water. At the same moment, Camillo stood alone by the signal tower again. He looked up at the sky and saw the stars above the zone shimmer not like light, but like memory. They flickered slightly out of sync with the rest of the cosmos, as if something was bending space not through force, but through focus. As he reached out and touched the metal tower again, it vibrated under his fingers, gently at first, then like a breath exhaling from the ground. He saw something then, not with eyes, but with awareness. A shape. Coiled, like strands of light spun in a helix, deep under the crust, watching back. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a machine. It was a nest. A consciousness woven into frequency, old as time, asleep, until now. The pulses were its dreams. But now the rhythm was changing. It wasn't dreaming anymore. It was waking up. And they were standing at the edge of its mind. The ground cracked at dawn. No warning. No tremor. Just a slow, deliberate sound like old bones breaking under stone. The desert opened not with violence, but with purpose, as if something beneath had chosen the exact moment to let itself be seen. Marta stood outside the lab, staring at the fissure now splitting the center of the zone. It wasn't wide. No more than a meter across. But it ran deep. So deep that the light refused to reach its bottom. What lay below was not rock. It was blackness that pulsed, almost like it was breathing. The temperature dropped, then rose. Air shimmered above the crack, warping the horizon, bending sunlight into shapes that didn't make sense. Camillo reached out with a thermal sensor. The reading showed a sudden spike over 200 degrees Celsius, but no heat was felt on the skin. The heat existed only in the data. As if it were real for the machine, but not for the world. That was the moment Alejandra said it first, her voice low and almost afraid to speak the words, "We're not standing above something. We're standing inside it." Marta ordered a drone to be lowered into the fissure. The cable hummed as it descended. Video feed flickered in and out, static, then brief images. What they saw was not Earth. It was organic. Walls of light, pulsing in rhythmic waves, like neural pathways woven from glowing threads. A lattice, alive but unmoving. Then a shape moved across the feed, too fast to define, too smooth to be mechanical, and too large to belong to anything man had built. The drone lost signal. The last frame showed something that resembled a membrane, and behind it, a flicker of eyes. But not eyes like ours, eyes that saw thought instead of light. Then came the sound, not through speakers, but inside their heads, all at once. A low thrum, like a song hummed by the earth itself, vibrating through bone and blood. It wasn't painful. It was intimate. Deeply personal. The sensation made Camillo fall to his knees, clutching his chest. "It's inside me," he gasped. "It knows I'm here." His pupils dilated unnaturally. He began repeating a pattern of numbers, not in Spanish, not in English, but in a tongue none of them recognized. Yet somehow, it felt familiar. Alejandra stared at the signal chart. The pulses had changed again, no longer just 3 and pause. They had become recursive, layered, complex, like a language evolving in real time. She pulled up ancient phonetic scripts, Sumerian, Ugaritic, Indus Valley, none matched. But the rhythm was present in all of them. An echo, a genetic memory that tied the human mind to something far older than Earth. That night, Marta stepped alone toward the fissure. She couldn't explain why. Her body moved before her thoughts could catch up. The zone was shifting, expanding in diameter, slowly, as if growing hungrier. The lights around the site dimmed, even with full power. The stars overhead blinked out one by one, not from clouds, but from something unseen, drifting between the earth and sky, blocking constellations like curtains of invisible cloth. The pressure in the air thickened. Time itself seemed slower. Then Marta heard the voice. Not words. Emotion, translated into rhythm. It asked no question. It gave no command. It simply revealed. Images flooded her mind of ancient cities glowing beneath stars that no longer existed, of creatures made from vibration and thought, of a time when human beings were not just individuals, but part of a network of living memory. The nest wasn't just a structure. It was a core of consciousness, built by minds that never needed mouths. It had not been speaking. It had been waiting for resonance. And Marta had started to match. Her heart sank to the pulse. Her brain waves aligned. She began to feel her own identity slipping gently, not violently. Not as a loss, but emerging. Like returning to a song she'd forgotten she knew. The others rushed to her, trying to pull her back, but the air around her shimmered like glass rippling underwater. Alejandra screamed, but no sound came out. Camilo reached her hand, his fingers touched Marta's jacket. And he was thrown back 10 meters, eyes wide, trembling, his mind filled with visions that didn't belong to him. Beneath them, the ground pulsed again. The fissure widened slightly. The heartbeat of the earth was no longer buried. It was rising. The zone no longer behaved like space. By the next evening, the team's perception of direction, time, even emotion, had begun to slip. Conversations looped without them realizing. They forgot what day it was. Some woke up from dreams they couldn't remember but came back with symbols drawn into their palms in dust, though no one saw them sleep outside. The fissure had widened another 2 feet, and its rim now glowed faintly in the dark, not with light, but with something like memory, bleeding through the cracks of this reality. No one said it, but everyone felt it. They were being scanned. Not their bodies, their truths. Alejandra was the first to embrace it. She sat close to the rim for hours, not speaking. Her eyes followed invisible patterns in the air. When Marta asked what she was doing, Alejandra simply smiled, as if she'd been told a secret the others weren't ready to know. It's not trying to hurt us, she whispered. It's trying to recognize us. But recognition wasn't the same as acceptance. Camilo began to resist. The patterns, the pulses, the dreams, he claimed they were a trick, a kind of invasive hypnosis. He wrapped his head in foil, built a crude Faraday cage around his bed, refused to eat anything from inside the zone. But it was already too late. He'd been exposed. And now, he was out of sync. That night, they found him wandering beyond the zone's radius, muttering in a broken language that mimicked Alejandra's cadence but twisted, like something had tried to copy her and failed. His eyes no longer followed motion. He was empty, but still watching. When Marta tried to reach him, he screamed. Not a human scream. Not primal. Mechanical. Like a voice filtered through an ancient machine buried in rock. Then, he collapsed, and all signals from his biosensors went flat. Not dead. Not alive. Disconnected. Marta locked him in the external van and sealed off his access. But the damage rippled. Later, she noticed her own hand trembling not with fear, but with resonance. The same rhythmic twitch she saw in the signal logs was now present in her fingers. It spread to her breath. To her thoughts. She stopped thinking in words. She began hearing meaning instead. Not sentences, structures. Ideas, compressed into feelings that unfolded like music only her nervous system could interpret. Alejandra could already speak in that rhythm. She and the nest were no longer separate. She had become a translator not of language, but of presence. When she placed her hand over the fissure, the air bent slightly, like space itself was trying to reach toward her. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "There's more of them, you know. This is just the first node." Marta didn't sleep that night. The stars above the zone no longer aligned with any known constellation. New ones had begun to form shapes that repeated in the soil, in their dreams, in the spacing of their heartbeats. The sinking wasn't random. It was intelligent. Intentional. And only those aligned with the core pulse would be accepted into whatever network the nest had once belonged to. She checked the logs. 3 of the 5 team members had begun to emit low-frequency fields on their own. No devices attached. The fields were growing stronger, and they matched the inner lattice detected deep within the rift. Camillo's readings, however, had vanished entirely. Like he had been erased from the system. At 3:03 a.m., Marta stood alone beside the nest. And it called her name. Not aloud. Not in her head. In her DNA. A biological memory, one she never knew she carried activated. She saw flashes of something impossible, ancestors kneeling before towers of light in forgotten deserts, glimpses of their cells responding to tones, adjusting their very code through song. Human evolution was never random. It was guided. And now, the signal had found her. But it would ask, one final time, are you willing to forget what you were, to become what you were meant to be? The sinking had begun. And the price was identity. By the 5th night, the boundary between the zone and the outside world was no longer visible. It had stretched beyond the makeshift camp, swallowing the sand, the air, the stars above it. Signals sent from inside no longer reached satellite receivers. GPS coordinates within the zone scrambled into unreadable spirals. Even time began to deform, watches ticked slower, voices echoed long after they'd been spoken, and shadows behaved like memory, arriving late, lingering too long. Martin no longer felt like she was in a place. She was inside a thought vast, alive, and ancient beyond reckoning. Camillo was gone. Not dead. Not missing. Gone from the data of the world. His biometric logs returned null, not zero. His existence had been pulled from their systems like an unused word from a forgotten language. What remained of him sat in the van, unmoving, unblinking, eyes reflecting nothing. He had been rejected by the nest, his mind too dissonant, his fear too loud. Alejandra explained it with no anger, no sorrow. He was holding onto himself too tightly. The nest doesn't destroy. It simply disconnects what cannot merge. Alejandra's transformation was nearly complete. Her skin glowed faintly now, only visible in the deep dark. When she spoke, the wind around her slowed. Her voice was no longer sound, it was pattern, and it resonated inside the bones of those who listened. She told Marta, calmly, that there were others, around the planet. Other nests. Other zones. All dormant. Waiting. Listening. Not for technology, but for alignment. The human body was never the receiver, it was the antenna. The real signal required the mind to let go of the shape it was taught to believe in. Marta began to feel it too. Her blood had a rhythm now. Her breath was not her own, it matched the pulse buried under the earth. The more she synchronized, the more her memories became soft, blurred. She could no longer recall her childhood in Santiago with clarity. Instead, she remembered standing on a desert not of this world, beneath a sky that sang. She remembered being many, not just one. The loneliness she carried all her life was not human, it was the absence of signal. Now it was returning. She stood at the edge of the fissure. The glow below had formed a distinct structure, a dome of living light, woven from thousands of strands, each one vibrating in silent harmony. It pulsed in her chest before her eyes could even comprehend its shape. A frequency entered her bones. She stepped forward. The shimmer around her body thickened. Her skin began to soften, not physically, but informationally, like her body was becoming readable, like data unraveling from a tightly encrypted code. She knew this was the final moment. Either she would become something new, or vanish like Camillo, unseen, unremembered, misaligned. The transmission started. But it wasn't sent through the air. It went through her. Her body lit up like a beacon. Her mind cracked, not broken, but opened. Words from no language poured through her veins, memory that was not hers bloomed like light in her skull. She saw other planets, other nests, species that never needed eyes, beings who communicated in shared memory and collective emotion. They had seeded these nests across the stars not to control but to reconnect what had been scattered. Humanity was not their experiment. It was their echo. Now, through Marta, the signal returned to the sky not as a scream, but as a note. It vibrated past time, past noise, into the void between stars. Somewhere, out there, the origin point heard her. But the choice was never forced. The nest would not keep her. She had to choose. To become a node in something infinite, or to remain herself, unmerged, alone, but whole. She stepped into the light. And vanished. The next morning, the fissure was gone. No sign of collapse. No burn marks. No trace of technology. Just a flat, silent desert, still and ancient as ever. A single frequency hung in the air. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. And then, a 4th. Humanity had answered. But what it had promised in return, remained unknown. In the end, Marta made her choice. She stepped into the pulse not to escape, but to become something more. A bridge between the human mind and an alien memory too vast for language. The nest didn't force her. It simply asked, "Are you ready to let go of who you were, to become what you were always meant to be?" Now, I ask you, what would you have done in her place? Would you keep your identity or embrace a higher consciousness at the cost of self? Tell me. Which part of this story hit you the hardest? If your friend began to sync with something non-human, would you stop them? Do you believe humanity was always meant to reconnect with something greater, or are we not ready yet? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me on the alien storyverse, where every story is a doorway into the unknown. Until next time, keep listening. The signal might already be inside you.